This is part 1 of topic 12, and topic 12 is all about international macroeconomics. So we've got 5 points here that we're going to cover in this topic. First of all, financial flows, that is money moving between countries from one financial market to another. So what I mean by that is typically money moving from one country to another into stock markets, bond markets, and other financial markets. The second issue is the balance of payments. Then we've got a small open economy model that we'll be developing, which is quite insightful. And then we've got 2 important issues to finish off this topic. First of all, global imbalances, which we'll see is one of the fundamental causes of the global financial crisis. And finally, the policy trilemma. In this first slide, we've got global financial assets and how those global financial assets have grown over time. So at the moment, or the last reading here on this graph, total global financial assets were around $225 trillion. But it's interesting to note that there was quite an acceleration in the amount of global financial assets on issue in the 90s and into the 2000s, leading up to the GFC in 2007-2008. From about 2008 onwards, the growth rate in financial assets globally has been much more moderate. So we've got growth rates here, annual growth rates of around 8%, much faster than GDP, global GDP. But after the global financial crisis, we can see that global financial assets growth has grown only by about 2%. So the GFC has really slowed down the pace at which financial institutions are issuing financial assets. Now, in terms of financial assets, these include equity, which is shares. We've got global bonds, financial bonds, which are typically bank bonds, and corporate bonds. And then there's a securitized and non-securitized loans. So most of this is made up of shares and bonds, and you can really see the importance of bonds here. Bonds by far is the largest of category in terms of financial assets. Now, the important part of this particular slide is not so much that total global financial assets have been growing over time, but that as the size of these global equity and bond markets have increased, the amount of money flowing between countries has also increased. Now, when money flows from one country to another, it passes, and I'm talking about investment money here, so financial flows, it passes through the country's capital account. Now, the capital account is part of the country's balance of payments, and we'll be looking at the structure of the balance of payments very, very soon. But just for now, there is an issue that you may want to have a look at in a little bit more detail. You'll have to do your own research on this, and that is capital account liberalisation. So you never really need to find out what that is about. Some countries have a very liberalised and free and open capital account. Other countries have a very closed capital account. Examples of the two: liberalised, open, free capital account in Australia, a closed capital account or a restrictive capital account would be China. So once you understand the structure of the balance of payments, do a little bit of your own reading on capital account liberalisation. Okay, the balance of payments records all economic transactions involving an Australian and a foreign entity. That could be a foreign company, foreign government, or a foreign consumer. Now, the balance of payments records the financial flows behind economic transactions. So when we sell a ton of iron ore to China, the balance of payments doesn't record the iron ore leaving Australia, it records the money flowing into Australia in payment for that iron ore. So it's really the financial flows behind economic transactions that are recorded in balance of payments. So if we have a look at the structure of the balance of payments, this will all make a lot more sense. So what we've got here is Australia's balance of payments for 2006-7, 2007-8, 2008-9. The balance of payments can be broken up into 2 main components. First of all, the current account up the top here, and the capital financial account down the bottom. Now, the current account is made up of 3 components: goods and services, which generally records economic transactions such as imports and exports of goods and services. We've got primary income. Most of that is interest payments on bonds, dividend payments on shares flowing from one country to another, and then secondary income. It's quite a small category. There's not much of the secondary income is not large relative to, say, primary income or goods and services. But in secondary income, there's things like transfer payments. So if someone moves from England to Australia and they're eligible for the English pension, then as the English government sends the pension payments each month to that person living in Australia, that money will pass through the secondary income part of the current account. So really it's up to you to do some reading about what is in each of these and have a reasonably good understanding of the types of transactions that are in goods and services, primary income and secondary income. In terms of the bottom half of the balance payments, the capital and financial account, with the capital account, if you have a look at the size of the figures, they're very, very small. And in fact, in a lot of quarters here, there is no entry at all. So the capital account records just a relatively few reasonably obscure transactions. Most of the action is going on in the financial account down the bottom here. So most of the capital financial account is actually the financial account component. If you have a look under financial account, you'll see direct investment, portfolio investment, financial derivatives, which is investment, and other investment. So all of the investment flows that either enter a country or leave a country are recorded in the financial account. So at the top, we've got imports and exports. We've got income and dividend or interest and dividend payments and sort of transfer payments. Right down the bottom, we've got investment. So that's a nice way to think about the balance of payments. At the top, imports, exports, and then whatever the transactions that are in primary and secondary income. So very short-term economic transactions, and then right down the bottom, investment flows, which are kind of longer economic transactions in the sense that they involve a longer-term relationship between the foreigner and the domestic agent. Now, all of the negative entries that you see in this table, any negative entry means that money is leaving the country. So if we have a look under the current account, we've got goods and services, credits and debits. They're sort of total figures, but if we go a little bit further down, we've got goods, we've got credits and debits. Now, one of these, credits or debits, must be imports of goods, the other must be exports of goods. Now, the easy way to actually figure out which is imports and which is exports is to look at the figures. So let's take goods, debits. The figure here for 2006-2007 is minus $183 billion. Now, because it's a negative figure, minus $183 billion, it must mean that money was leaving the country, leaving Australia, as a result of all of the transactions that are grouped together under goods and services, goods, debits. So if money is leaving the country, that must have been goods that we were actually importing into Australia and sending money overseas, hence the negative figure here, in payment for those imported goods. So debits is imports, and credits, because it's a positive number, $165 billion, that must be exports, because money would have been flowing into Australia, positive number, as we export those goods. So negative numbers, money flowing out of Australia, positive numbers, money flowing into Australia. So in terms of the current account, we've got a large negative number. So that must mean in net terms, more money is leaving Australia as a result of the transactions recorded in the current account than is entering the country. That is offset by the capital financial account balance, which is positive, so that is a net inflow of money. If we go to the next slide, I've put a rectangle around two figures, and what I've got there is the current account deficit for 2006-2007 and the capital financial account surplus for the same year. If you have a look at the numbers, the same balances for 2007, 2008 and 2008, 2009, and even the quarterly figures further to the right, you can see that approximately the current account balance equals the capital financial account balance, but they are just of opposite sign. Now, the difference between these two numbers, the current account balances and the capital financial account balances, is right down the bottom under net errors and omissions. So that's kind of hinting at the only reason there is a difference between these numbers is that somewhere along the line there's a small error or an omission from the balance of payments, which means that which makes these numbers not exactly equal. So what's the significance of these numbers equaling each other? It's quite important. In 2006-2007, we can see that the capital financial account surplus was $60 billion. And most of that was a result of the financial account, and we had a financial account surplus of $60 billion, and that really means that in net terms, $60 billion more entered Australia than left Australia in terms of foreign investment flows. So another way of saying that is foreigners invested $60 billion more in Australia than Australia invested overseas. We had a net inflow of investment funds of $60 billion. Now, as we'll learn a little bit later on, that is mainly a result of the negative savings investment imbalance in Australia. So savings minus investment in Australia is negative, i.e. we don't save enough to pay for all of our own investment. In fact, in 2006-2007, we had a shortfall of savings relative to investment of $60 billion. So investment was $60 billion more than savings. As a result, we needed to issue equity or shares rather, and bonds, and undertake other types of lending to the tune of $60 billion to actually pay for all of our investment to cover the savings investment shortfall in Australia. Now, that money, $60 billion, came into Australia. Now, you can't simply allow huge amounts of money to come into a country and let it stay within the country and circulate. Why not? Because eventually it will be very, very inflationary. So if we look up to the current account here, we'll see that almost the same amount, almost exactly the same amount, left Australia. So we had $60 billion entering Australia as a result of foreigners investing in Australia. But then in terms of the current account, 60 billion, well, 59 billion left Australia. In the following year, 2007-2008, 72 billion came in, or 72.5 billion came in, 73 left Australia. The next year, 38.9 came in, 38.2 left Australia. So in terms of our international relations with other countries, every time $1 billion comes into Australia, it seems to leave through the current account. Every time $10 billion comes in, it seems to leave through the current account. So it really does take pressure off the domestic economy in the sense that we don't just have 60 billion, 72 billion and $39 billion pouring into Australia year after year. The money does flow back out. Now that's what we call external balance. We are balanced in terms of flows of monies with the rest of the world. Now what actually creates that balance? That's an interesting question because it's not obvious at first, because all of the transactions that are recorded in the capital financial account, they are investment flows. And a lot of this money is actually flowing out of Australia due to imbalances in goods and services, or deficits in terms of goods and services, deficits in terms of primary income and small deficits in terms of secondary income. So how do we coordinate all of these different transactions involving millions of different Australians? How are they all coordinated so that the inflow of money each year equals the outflow? Well, it's actually a result of the exchange rate. The exchange rate adjusts to make sure that every time we have a large inflow of money into Australia, the exchange rate changes to make sure an equal amount of money flows out through the current account.